From the 1950s to the 1980s, as the Cold War raged, the domino theory was prevalent. My guest, of course, is Larry Nichols. Larry, how you feeling today?
Much better than last week, and I do apologize for being so down, but I'm up and at 'em again.
Good to hear that, Larry. There's no need to apologize. I think everybody has got your health in mind, and we understand. Glad to have you back this week. So, Larry, give us a little bit of background. I'm not sure if all of our viewers realize, I mean, people know, of course, that you worked with the Clintons and that you're Hillary and Bill Clinton's worst nightmare, essentially. But does everybody know about the details of your military background? And you've told me about your time in the Green Berets. Can you get into that a little bit before we talk about the domino theory and version 2.0 of that?
Well, it was just a combination of going on different excursions, and I guess the biggest one, or the most infamous, was the Nicaraguan resistance, the Contras. And that was when I had the privilege of working for President Reagan and his dear friend Adolfo Calero, who was the head of the Contras. He was the big, tall, gray-headed guy that you always saw with Reagan.
What was that guy's name?
Adolfo Calero. Adolfo Calero and his brother Mario.
Okay. So give us a little background, because I think it's amazing to me how few people, Larry, know about and remember the details of Iran-Contra. So there was some U.S. military involvement with the Contras prior to the scandal, or what was the background there?
You know, this is where it all got distorted. Because of North and Poindexter and some of their shenanigans, what happened was that everything got balled up in Iran-Contra. Now, Iran-Contra was ostensibly where we traded arms for whatever, and none of that did I have anything to do with, other than when North and Poindexter were taken out and pulled off the case, then they put General Jack Singlov in to replace Poindexter and me to replace North.
Wow.
Singlov went around, as did Poindexter, around the country raising money, private funding for the Contras, and then I was on the ground.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You know, it was a different time then, but it's not as different as people would think. I need to explain, if I may, Jason, for just a moment, the domino theory. What was that about?
Yes.
Ronald Reagan had a strong fear, as did many Americans in that day, that as the spread of communism took hold in Central America, that it would work its way up to Mexico. So, in other words, Nicaragua, then Guatemala, then, El Salvador, Costa Rica, Honduras, all those, and then it would flood its way up to Mexico, where people were wrong. They envisioned that if the Contras had not stopped the Soviet movement in Central America at the time, they thought that there would be some kind of attack from Mexico. That was never the plan. That was never the thing that we were trying to fight against. There was never a day that we worried, or Ronald Reagan worried, or anybody else, that once they got in and took hold of Mexico, that Mexico was going to do an all-out attack against America. It just wasn't going to be so. But what we were worried about was, as it spread and it got closer and closer to Mexico, then what you had is you had an open border, which would allow for thousands and thousands of Soviet-trained people to come into this country. And then we would have an insurgent force within our country to disrupt everything. Mm-hmm. And that was what we were fighting against.
And Larry, just to take it back even a bit further, this domino theory was, even Eisenhower was talking about that, right? It was the general view of communism, that it was this subversive thing that was going to take over like a disease if we didn't stop it, right?
Right. And it was that's why we supposedly got in Vietnam. That's why we got all over the place, because it was a game of chess back then, where the Soviets would take one country, then we would come in and take another, and it would just block, and they'd take and we'd block, they'd take and we'd block. But the real concern was when it got to the Americas, then we would really have trouble. And that's why President Reagan had to go all out. In Nicaragua, that was the battle line. That was when the decision was made. It's got to stop, and it's got to stop now. And the best place to stop it was in Nicaragua.
Right. And I think we should also give people some background. You know, Ronald Reagan was the president of the Screen Actors Guild when he was an actor, and that was during the period in Los Angeles as regarded as a very dark time in the movie industry, where tons of people were being accused of being communists and essentially blacklisted. Writers and actors and directors were completely ostracized for being communist. It basically was like the death, you know, the kiss of death for your career if you got accused of being a communist. And now today, of course, we've got Ocasio-Cortez and others proudly, you know, winning on the platform of being socialists. For someone who was alive at the time of, you know, in the 50s and 60s and throughout the Cold War, it's got to be pretty bizarre to see that happening, right?
Right. You know, it's incredible for me, and I would assume for anybody in the age group. You know, we came up with socialism, communism being bad.
Yeah.
And it has proven itself to be bad throughout history. But today, you've got what's your name, and you've got several Democrats that are standing up proudly boasting that they believe in a democratic socialism. And even today, I would say maybe they're right. Okay, I would say maybe things have changed, and maybe there is some merit to it until you look simply at Venezuela. Venezuela is not unique. It's following all of the patterns that have come before it, and socialism does not work. It will not work. It destroys. It does not build. It doesn't help anybody. But for some reason, the young people today that are now taking their places in Congress, they seem to they don't have the background we have, Jason. They don't have a history of communism being bad or socialism being bad. They think it's just another form of government that makes sense, where you can just make everybody happy, where everybody's making the same and et cetera.
Sharing and all that. Yeah.
Yes. And it's frustrating to me, but now it has become scary to me because I'm seeing fruition. I'm seeing it come to fruition, just what Reagan and all of us stood against back then. Believe it or not, it's happening now. I love the title for the program that you gave, you know.
2.0, Domino Theory 2.0.
Yeah. That's right. Because exactly what happened is now happening. Now, I'm not here, Jason, to say that all of the people that are here illegally have nefarious reasons for being here. I'm not saying that at all. I'm sure that the majority are here for, you know, just to better their lives or whatever. But then, when I think about the government's figure that they put out a couple of weeks ago, 20 million illegals in this country right now. In this country right now. 20 million. I think that's low, but that's what they use. So if we use it, my point is, if only 10% of that 20 million are here for some sinister purpose, that's 2 million people in our country right now. 2 million. That's a huge, huge excursionary group. It's a huge insertion. And it's here now.
Yeah. Larry, I'm showing a piece from The Hill that came out, it looks like in October of last year. Yale and MIT have done a study that determined 22 million, not 11 million, undocumented immigrants in the United States. You know, Larry, I would maybe augment what you're saying in that I'm not so sure that the infiltration that we need to worry about are these 22 million. They almost seem like pawns of those that have infiltrated Congress, which are jihadis and socialists who are there already. I think they're, positioning these 22 million to get the right to vote, and then that's it. We've got people who aren't citizens suddenly becoming citizens who can vote and decide the future of the country.
Right. I mean, that was all a part of it. Once they get that kind of foothold inside our country, it's been long known by our enemies, why fight America? Why enter into these regional wars, as was the case with Vietnam, Nicaragua, et cetera, because they're expensive, it's just a bad way to go. They realized, hey, we can buy Congress in the United States.
Right.
They realized that they can buy politicians in this country and get virtually anything they want through the system. But you still have to be cognizant of the fact that there's 2 million here, possibly 2 million, possibly. Even if it's 5%, that's still 1 million.
It's crazy.
If they rise up at one time, just all of them pick up a rock, we have a formidable foe right here. Now, the other thing, Jason, that was pointed out back during the Domino Theory was to watch what they call the migration patterns. That was going to be one of the indicators to be, to put us on a higher alert. What did that mean, the migration patterns? Imagine a 16 or 17-year-old young man from El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, wherever. He just uproots himself from that country, comes all the way across the land, all the way through Mexico, gets to the border, and then he comes across our border, and then somehow he miraculously ends up in Oshkosh, America somewhere.
Right.
It doesn't make sense. How would he know to go to that place?
Right.
Then you must be alerted to the fact that I doubt there is a city, I doubt there is a town, I doubt there is a community of any size in this country, but there is not at present a contingent of illegals. I think that would be more rare than what people can imagine. I mean, they're everywhere.
Yeah.
And why is that significant? That's significant because in America, they know, they're very much aware that we cannot take our military against an insurgent force in this country because of posse comitatus. Posse comitatus, folks. Posse comitatus. And that is the law by which American military cannot take action against Americans within the boundaries of the United States of America. They're not allowed to.
Really?
Now, there's only one condition by which American soldiers, can involve themselves in a conflict within this country, and that's under martial law. And if a president declares martial law now, you do have military access. But think of this. Let's first deal without the ruling of martial law. One of the reasons I believe President Trump is as vehement about calling it an invasion as he does is I think he and most of the national security team are very, very much aware of what I'm talking about.
Right.
If, let's say, and I'll use Arkansas as an example, we have a huge contingent of MS-13. Well, first off, let me back up. Adolfo Claro, when I asked him over and over several times, how did Nicaragua fall into the hands of Daniel Ortega in the communists? He said it was very gradual. But what's interesting, do you know where Daniel Ortega came from?
I don't. I remember the name, but I don't know much about him at all.
Well, he's the president of Nicaragua. He was the president then when all this was going on.
Yeah.
He and his brother, Humberto, came into Nicaragua from Costa Rica and they were nothing more than a street gang.
Wow.
The street gang, just like we have today with MS-13. They were extremely violent. They were incredibly cruel. And then they started, Adolfo would tell me, they started spreading out into enclaves. In other words, they started getting out of Managua into smaller communities all throughout the land. And then one day, the next thing they knew, they were of size enough that guess what? Russia and the Soviet Union, excuse the dog, they took note of them. And so then the Soviets started investing in Ortega, and they took over. Now, I see the same pattern here with MS-13. Here they come into our country. You would think they would be local in L.A. or they'd be wherever, but these guys have spread out all over the country. There's another signature to MS-13 that troubles me, and that's the violence and the extreme cruelty of their initiation. Mm. You see, their initiation, you've got to, as I understand what's been publicized, to get in and be one of them, you have to violently murder someone.
Yes.
You got
I understand, Larry, there's some component of satanic ritual involved with MS-13. I could be wrong about that, but I've heard that.
I don't know, but I do know that one of the signatures of a clandestine organization is the security. How do you protect the security of your organization? And the way Ortega did it, the Ortega brothers, what they would do is they would take a new member, and then that person would have to catch somebody, an innocent individual, they'd have to catch them, and then put them in, wrap them in barbed wire, stick them in big tires, and then set the tires on fire.
Whoa.
Right, for everybody to see. When you do that kind of activity, you're in the group, and they can trust you. If you haven't done that, they cannot trust you.
Right.
So here we go. Now we got MS-13 following the same kind of ritual pattern for initiation into the group. They are spread out now throughout the country. They've merged with other gangs throughout the country. So we're looking at a situation that if you follow Nicaragua, if you understand that one is just sort of a warning sign, they're following that pattern pretty much to the T.
Wow.
And the question is, are they funded by Russia? Are they funded presently by China? What about Iran?
How about the Muslim Brotherhood?
Right. I mean, think about it, folks. They're here. Now back to the modern day scenario. In Arkansas, let's say with the big contingent we have in Little Rock, it explodes. They go ballistic. They don't have to be trained to be Green Berets. All they've got to be trained to be able to do is what they call disrupt. All they got to do is disrupt the community, knock out the power, shut down the economy. You know, they can go and shoot up people at a shopping center, do it 2 or 3 times, and then what happens? The whole town stops shopping.
Exactly.
You've got an economy that just shuts down.
Right. Larry, people are asking us, what does MS-13 stand for? It stands for Mara Salvatrucha. I don't know what that means, but it's an international criminal gang that originated apparently in Los Angeles. I think they're mostly from Guatemala, or no, it says here most members are Salvadorian.
Right. So let's say the contingent in Little Rock goes crazy and starts disrupting the town. Now, obviously, they're too much down for local law enforcement.
Right.
When they literally arm up, they've got weapons, they've got the people, they can drive an entire city into panic. So the governor would call in the National Guard. Short of martial law, a governor could call in the National Guard. He could do it in Little Rock. But what happens, Jason, at the same time Little Rock explodes, the gang in Conway, the gang in Benton, the gang in Russellville, the gang in Malton, the gang in Fayetteville, all of them hit at one time. What will happen then is the smaller communities are left to fend for themselves. And this is why I've been going out on my YouTube channel warning people to arm up, which is very uncomfortable for me to do. I don't like doing it. But you've got to understand, if this is right, and if the word I'm getting from the people that I trust would know that when President Trump invokes the emergency law to build the wall, there's a good chance that the gangs will solidify and come out. Be a triggering point for riots and all kinds of stuff in the streets and throughout the communities.
Right.
So now you're in a smaller community. What are you going to do? Your police force is overwhelmed. They're outnumbered, outgunned. It will get down in that scenario, Jason, to where people are going to have to protect their own lives and their own property. And you better be ready. Now, I'm not asking people to go out waving the guns, wearing guns on their hip, and talking tough and prying guns out of my cold dead hands. I'm not talking about that kind of stuff at all. I'm just talking about we have got to have a keen sense of awareness. The signs are lining up to look like there could be trouble. Jason, of the 20 million that are here, who are they?
Right.
Who are they? Where did they come from?
Yeah.
You see,
Larry, let me ask you a question, because I think everyone knows you spent time in Vietnam and you know a lot about that. I've heard, I don't know as much about the Vietnam conflict as I should, and I'm interested in learning more. I've heard that as a precursor to the war, there was a migrant crisis initiated where the South flooded the North or the North flooded the South or something like that for the specific reason that you're describing, to overwhelm the local police forces and create a sense of chaos so that people would sort of want the military presence there. What have I got wrong about that?
Well, originally, now that was before my time when all of this was going down, but I can tell you that when I got there, there were signs of the French being there before us. The French were actually called in because it was one of their quote-unquote colonies. And as the migration effect took place, the local government could not handle it, so it was up to the French government to bring in the people in the military, to defend against it. But it was exactly the same thing that we're talking about here. It was a huge migration. Look at the migration pattern. That's what you've got to watch. Ants, animals, when they migrate, they go together. They stay together, right? But in this pattern, what's happening is they come into America, but then they scatter. And then as I said, who are these 20 million people? They come here to escape oppression, right? And they're afraid. But then they don't want to assimilate with us. Have you noticed that? These enclaves within the communities, they're communities within themselves. They don't want to assimilate. They don't want to learn their language.
Right.
And I guess one of the big things that offends me is they're here because they're being oppressed and they're afraid in their home country. They had to leave. They seek asylum. But then every time you turn around, they're waving their country's flag. Well, wait a minute. If I was that scared of my country, I don't think I'd be wanting to proudly carry the banner.
Right.
This is a very real possibility, folks.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's 100% dead nut cinch. But Jason, let me ask you this, and answer me as honestly as you can.
Sure.
Do you not believe the state our country is in right now, something's got to happen, something's got to snap?
I do believe that, Larry. In fact, I think that there are people making plans at a higher level. You see, it's interesting. You're right. It's good that we name this Domino Theory 2.0. And I know that when I said it last night, you really liked it because, I grew up during the technological explosion. I mean, when I was a little kid, I remember a computer store being a new thing and being in there fascinated by the computers, and I've used them my whole life. And to you, I would imagine, or anyone who didn't grow up that way, computers still seem sort of like a new thing, even though they're not that new, and all this 2.0 and all that. The thing is, it's always an incremental improvement to the process with software. 2.0 is always going to have more features, new refinements, new capabilities as compared to 1.0. So I think there's a lot of depth to this Domino Theory 2.0 idea, and I think that what we're seeing in some ways, Larry, is an infiltration of Congress that is using these migrants as a tool. See, it's a primary, this has been a real logjam for President Trump. He's saying we've got laws, we've got a country, we've got borders, we've got a legal process by which people can immigrate. And I can tell you, Larry, in my personal communications with people, whenever I'm in a taxi or I'm somewhere and I detect an accent, I sort of ask the person where they're from, and I've found that every person who I've spoken to who has legally immigrated to the United States, they are the most vocal supporters of the wall and a tough immigration policy.
Yes. And Jason, in many of those cases with people that are here legally, it's not jealousy. A lot of people say, well, they're just jealous because they, spent all this money and came in the way they did, and you're stupid because these other people are just coming in, and just
walking right in.
Paying it. It's not true. They're scared of what they left and what they saw, and they don't want it coming here.
Yeah.
I mean, this all boils down to we've got a major problem now. The question is, are these people that are moving into Washington, moving into our Congress, are they leading the way for all of these illegals, or are they using them? Maybe they're jumping on the bandwagon. They're using them. They're saying, hey, there's this huge 20 million force out here that if we can get them behind us and we can change the law, then, hey, we're in forever. Remember, MS-13 and all these other gangs, they have no problem getting weapons.
Right.
Legal weapon owners have trouble. Right. Honestly, is getting tougher and tougher. It doesn't hinder the criminals at all, but it does the legal buyers.
Yeah.
Then look at our laws. Our laws protect them more than they do the innocent victim.
Hmm.
I mean, they're in excellent position. Now they move into Congress. They get people in Washington to cover them. With what? They're there in case they act up or they rise up and Congress gets in a position where it's got to do something. Well, guess what? They've got people there now to block it. They've got people to block it.
Yeah.
And I know people say, well, that's crazy. Well, let me tell you, Jason, 10 years ago, just 10 years ago, if you would have told people in America that it would be passable in some states have passed it, New York, Virginia got close, of taking a baby that's just born, keeping it comfortable until the doctor and the mother decide what they want to do. And then if they decide that they want to kill it, then they kill it.
It's crazy.
If you'd have told me 10 years ago that would even be something somebody would talk about, I would have said you were crazy.
Yeah. I don't understand how that passed. I don't understand how that's an abortion and not, that is actual murder. That's infanticide. You're talking about a living baby. It seems to be a direct contradiction of the Hippocratic Oath. How could a doctor even do that?
Well, that's the thing about that governor of Virginia. He's a pediatrician, for God's sake.
Wow.
How can he sit there as calmly and as cruelly as he did and say what he did in that interview or when he was talking that the camera, that people keep playing?
Yeah.
It's incredible. Then you take another thing. We've got the situation where the media is supposed to be a warning. It's supposed to be the truth. It's supposed to to be a beacon. It's supposed to help this country. Well, now it's just a propaganda tool. That's all it is. I mean, I can see there could be an outbreak in Baltimore, and the media not cover it. If it didn't benefit the Democrats or if it didn't benefit the socialists, then I can see the media might not even cover it to any degree.
Yeah.
That's how far we've gone.
Yeah. Sorry, I got people like to call while I'm trying to disrupt your show here, Larry. So let me take you back for a second to Nicaragua, because I think you are onto something. I think there's an important difference, however, in what's going on, or maybe it's not a difference. I need to learn more about what happened in Nicaragua. I agree with you that socialism is not a functional system and not the way that we want the United States to operate. I mean, just if you look at what's being proposed by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her supporters, they want free health care for everyone, free college for everyone, and anybody at all who wants to come to the United States can come here. There's no way that that can be sustained, because it would incentivize every single person in the world to come here to get a free education and free medical care, and there's no way that we could sustain that. It just doesn't make any sense. But it seems to me in Venezuela that the United States has been interfering. It's not, I'm not trying to disagree with the statement that socialism is not effective and not what we want, but it definitely seems like there were activities by the United States that strongly contributed to the dramatic failure that we're seeing in Venezuela right now.
And very, very possible, but that came from the proxy wars.
Right.
You know, here you had Russia that was intervening to get the oil and all of that stuff, and then they're saying, well, that can't be, so here we go sticking our foot in it. So that there's no doubt that we are part of some of the confusion of that country. But even with that, one thing you know, socialism cannot function. It just cannot.
Right.
I don't care what anybody says. When you take it and fix the world where it's supposedly this perfect world Cortez talks about, where you and I work, why would I want to work harder than you? Because I'm only going to make what you make no matter what.
Yeah, I find it very hypocritical of Ocasio-Cortez to be making these speeches while she's wearing, you know, high fashion from Chanel, and she's wearing an Apple Watch. I mean, certainly the development of the Apple Watch did not occur in communist China or Cuba or the Soviet Union. It took the free market and free thinking and decades of that market developing to create the environment where Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, those guys could create a computer company in their garage. I think I told you the story, Larry, about the time that I was in Kiev and saw a dilapidated building and made the suggestion of creating some sort of, neighbors association to hire someone to fix the building. And I was told that that's a very American way to think, and that in, just 12 years after perestroika, people in Ukraine were still waiting for somebody from the government to come fix the building. So it's a fundamental difference in the thought process. And I was fascinated by that statement because it's, you've got a whole generation or multiple generations there that are just culturally programmed to expect things to be done for them.
That's right. And then if you look at what I've been through, Vietnam, Cambodia, going back in history to Germany, what did they do? They burned the books. Cambodia, they killed anybody they could even read. Why? Because you do away with history. Well, we've got an entire generation that's called the, millennial group, and the history that they learned has been revised.
Yeah.
If you or I went back to school today, we probably wouldn't even recognize the history books.
Well, I think when I was in school, Larry, they were already feeding me crap. I remember my father took me to see the Oliver Stone film JFK in 1991 when it was out in the theater. And I was only 19 at the time, but I remember being quite impressed by that film. and really feeling like Oliver Stone was onto something. I knew nothing about the JFK assassination at the time that I saw that film. And what you're saying about burning books and killing people who can read, I mean, they were doing that because they didn't want information spread. It's remarkably similar to what's happening now with the deplatforming of Alex Jones, all the assaults on Patreon, the removal of Carl Benjamin, the deplatforming that's constantly being attempted against Crowdsource the Truth. I hope people will go to patreon.com/crowdsource the truth and become sponsors, or send a payment by paypal.me/crowdsource the truth. And it's also important that people sponsor Larry. Larry is sharing information with us that I think most people aren't really dialed into, and certainly the mainstream news isn't telling us about. So people should go over to nicholslive.com, click on the donate button, and make sure you go to PayPal and use Larry's email address, which is nicholslive@aol.com. I think Larry and I have really gotten into a productive groove here, working together and having these conversations each week at 3 p.m. Eastern. We get into a lot of really interesting topics, and I'm fascinated by the time you spent in Nicaragua, Larry. So let's go back to that for a second, because you were talking about Daniel Ortega and how he came in there. He started as a street gang leader and infiltrated that country, basically. So you were there at a time, there was a time that there was official U.S. government involvement in Nicaragua, right? And then we pulled out, and the whole Iran-Contra thing was a CIA operation.
Right. My time in Nicaragua was post-Iran-Contra.
Okay.
And it was in a moment in time when half the time we would get support. We had things called hard rice and soft rice. Soft rice was humanitarian supplies, food, medicine, etc. Hard rice was when we could ship weapons.
Right.
Now, half the time that I was there was under Reagan. And when I was working with him and Adolfo, things were actually pretty good because we had a constant supply. But now I'll give you another thing. Do you know what the average age of the Contra soldier was?
I don't.
Yeah.
Nope.
16.
Wow.
16. We had soldiers that were 11.
11?
If we had somebody 11, yes. I mean, we used kids 3 and 4 years old as minesweepers.
Wow.
I mean, you've got to get into the gory detail of it, but in that day, the Sandinistas, the Sandinos, had gotten so wise that they knew it was better to wound one of us than it was to kill us, because we didn't have the facilities to take care of wounded. So they used what we call tuna fish can mines. They were just enough to blow a limb off, but they normally wouldn't kill you.
Oh my God.
Well, we didn't have mine detectors, we didn't have stuff like that. So what happened, they ended up using small children to go through the territory first and step on the mines. That way, when the kids stepped on it, it would kill them.
Wow.
That's how bad it was.
Wow.
And, the most we ever had at one time, when I was there, which was the largest contingent, was I think 3,500. That was it. And we were up against 500,000 Sandinas. 500,000, and that meant Russians, Cuban black hats, Russian black hats, and the Sandinista. I mean, it was just, they had all the modern weapons of the days. They had jets, they had Hyundai helicopters, they had, tanks. We had AK-47s, and the only ammunition we could get typically for the AK was what we could forage from the enemy when we would take over their facilities.
Mm-hmm.
One of the biggest misnomers that, in the whole drug thing, drugs for guns that you heard from Barry Seal.
Yeah.
Well, the picture you see, the famous picture of Barry Seal in the Fat Lady, and they were offloading the weapons and loading on, or, loading cocaine on. But if you look at the picture, number one, they were offloading M16s. We didn't use M16s, not the Contras, because we couldn't have supplies of ammunition enough, so you didn't dare use those. You used AKs so that you could forage ammunition from the enemy. That was a total setup. That was wrong, but they spun it the way they wanted. Speaking of spinning it, what was one of the major things that the Soviet Union had? How did they get people in that country to be so awkward and backward compared to what the rest of the world and America was doing? They did it through a thing called Pravda. Pravda was the state-run media. Time and time and time again, I would know from a mission that I was involved with or knew about the true story, but then when you saw the Pravda version of it, it was just diametrically opposite of the true story. So the people in Russia were literally, they had no idea what was going on. Well, look at us today.
Right.
Look at the mainstream media today. If you're the 98% of America that gets 100% of that which you consider the news you need to make decisions about your government from your 6 and 10 o'clock local news, tell me how much they know about what's really going on.
Yeah.
See? I mean, all the ducks are lined up. It's all in a row. Then we had the big savior, social media. But look what they've done to social media. In comes censorship. In comes disinformation. I mean, people are buying into stuff that I can't believe. But they buy into it and they don't realize that sometimes somebody telling you something makes you feel good or gives you false hope, that's damaging. You need to know the truth. You need to know the truth of it all. That's why I'm so proud, Jason, of you and what you've done to crowdsource the truth. Not so much what you talk about as much as the fact that you have set it up to where you are not ad sponsored. You're sponsored by the people.
Yeah.
Well, that's huge. I do 2 programs, technically, other than my own YouTube. I do 2. That's you and a program called Pastor and Sanders, What's Right, What's Left at night every once in a while. Why him? Why you? Both of you are listener-sponsored. You're not advertising sponsored, or you're not controlled by this group or that.
Yeah.
And today, that means everything to me. Just like what we're talking about today. I know your audience won't believe this, but I'm very uncomfortable talking about this for 2 reasons. Number one, I don't like to put false alarms out there. If I thought this was bogus or false in any way, I wouldn't dare talk about it. Certainly not mention get your arms and have them close at hand in case you need them. I wouldn't do that. But the other thing, Jason, do you realize me and my family, I mean, I'm sitting here exposing MS-13 if they're part of this sinister plot. Don't you think they'd be well served to get rid of me or anybody else that would be blowing the whistle on it?
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely violent, and they don't seem to be too interested in negotiating. They just kill people. I don't understand why people would not want a wall on the border when we know there's all this violence going on there. I've seen a bunch of interviews with border agents and people who are down there in the border towns, and I don't know, it's a little crazy to see these people who are in New York or whatever, or Washington, D.C., talking about this like they have any idea what's going on. I saw a border agent talking about how, they're finding, children who are just like dead from dehydration because they're trying to walk across the desert. 12-year-old girls with birth control pills in their pockets because their parents send them knowing that they're going to be raped. I think the president is right. If there was a wall there and people knew it was extremely difficult to get into the United States illegally, it would discourage them from doing that. The other thing that I don't understand, Larry, there's a lot of people who will show, images and videos of tunnels or people climbing over the wall, and they say, oh, well, therefore it doesn't work, we shouldn't use it. I mean, that's sort of like saying, my house got broken into, so the door doesn't work, so nobody should have doors, and we should just leave the houses open so that people can come in because they're going to break in anyway.
Right. Well, look at the dichotomy here. Number one, they say the wall don't don't do a wall, but Pelosi has a wall around her house. I mean,
Right.
the stuff is, the symbolism just all awkward.
Yeah.
Then there's such humanitarians, right? There's such humanitarians. Well, one thing that is known through the Border Patrol and everybody else is that if we build a wall, do you realize you absolutely shut down human trafficking?
Well, right.
A wall would stop human trafficking. Well, sure, because you see, the key to human trafficking is they just got to take them across the border. But you put up a wall, now they've got to go offshore. Well, that's expensive. They got to fly them in. That's expensive. They've got to go up north and bring them back down through Canada, and that's expensive. So it becomes so expensive it can't function.
Yeah.
All within, just with the wall.
Yeah. I mean, Larry, it's true of any kind of security that whatever can be done can be defeated, but that doesn't mean that we just totally forego any security measures for fear that they'll be defeated. We need to make it more difficult for those that would attempt to defeat those security measures. And I think we should build a wall. I'm very interested to see what the president will say about it tonight at the State of the Union address. I don't know if you've heard about this, Larry, but our friend Laura Loomer was recently arrested. I finally got to speak to Laura, and that explained why she hadn't been responding to my texts. She's been trying to demonstrate this hypocrisy by first penetrating the security at Nancy Pelosi's house and climbing over the wall with some undocumented people who she met at Home Depot. And now she's been arrested jumping California governor's mansion wall. And it's written up here in the Daily Caller. I think Laura's very good at making a point. I'm always concerned for her safety. Getting arrested doesn't seem like it would be fun, but she definitely made the news.
Well, it's simply stated this way. To any one of the Democrats, would you be willing to get a knock on your door and, let's say, 5 or 6 illegal immigrants come to your door and say, no, we're just moving in?
Right.
Would you just take them in? Well, the answer is no.
Yeah.
I think that's an answer that's unilateral. Anybody would say, no, I can't just bring you in and take care of you, feed you, take care of your health needs, do all of that for people I don't even know. They won't do it. You can't do it. Well, the same holds true for our country.
Right.
Like you said, it makes no sense. You cannot obliterate our border, because if you do, just as things are today, it would just be an onslaught. But then when you start throwing in the incentives of free medical care, free education, free this, that, and the other, now you're taking what would be colossal and making it even bigger.
Yeah. I think you've raised the point, Larry, that this has been a slow infiltration over many, many years. The fact that Yale study found 22 million undocumented immigrants already here. I mean, you're right. At least it presents the possibility that there could be some very substantial sleeper cells among those 22 million. We don't know what countries they're from. Perhaps this Yale study goes into some more detail. But again, I mean, how are they getting this information? The number could be, it says that it's estimates that there are 22.1 million, could be much larger.
Right. And look, how many training facilities are there in Honduras training young men to come into this country and destroy the local power grid? How many training camps are there in Nicaragua to train young men how to come into this country and disrupt the local economy? How many? We don't know.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what's weird. I looked at these caravans that are coming up. Do you not find it odd that 80% of the people in these caravans, as recognized even by the media, 80% are young men from the ages of 16 to 19 years old?
No, I'm not surprised.
Now, that's exactly the age that you would want for this type of subversive activity.
Right.
And I'm telling you, most Central America, Jason, is founded in the Catholic culture. culture, right? I mean,
Yep.
most of them are Catholics and they have good family loyalty. But all of a sudden, we've got young men up and leaving their families and supposedly coming here and then just disappearing. You know, these pipelines must be impressive. The pipelines of how to get people from across the border to nowhere America, little community, or how to get them to, you know, you can understand getting them to LA, or you can understand getting them to New York or whatever, but what about all these small communities? And I tell you, there's the likelihood that there is a small community of any size, even though it's small, that there's not a contingent there. It just doesn't make sense. You know, why would you pick golly gee America, you know, in the middle of nowhere?
Right.
Especially coming from El Salvador.
Right. Yeah. Why, Larry, were you talking about the attack on the grid? Because people in the comments are saying that the electric grid going down is one of the biggest threats we could experience. And it brings me back to, I recall in 2003, there was a huge blackout here in New York City that, as far as I know, went as far down as Ohio, and there's a little map here showing it went into Canada. It really took out electric power and a lot of things. You know, here in New York City, I had no water in this building because the water is pumped by an electric pump to the roof of the building and then drawn down to the individual apartments by gravity. So yes, the loss of electricity, particularly for people who live in cities, which is most of our population, would be devastating. And it was strange to me, Larry, that the President, George W. Bush, said, we have no idea what caused this, but we know it wasn't terrorism. How can you say that if you don't know what it was?
Within hours after some explosion at a plant or some major thing, first words out of their mouth, we have no idea what caused it, but we've ruled out terrorism. Well, if you don't know what it is, how did you rule out anything?
Right. So perhaps that was a test, a dry run to see how robust the grid was. And I mean, I recall it took well over a week for that to come back.
Well, and remember also, in small communities, you know, how much trouble would it be to mess up the water system, for example? Most every community has its own water treatment facility, small as they are. Mm-hmm. How much trouble would it be to go in and interrupt that? Look, there's another thing. Here these people come into this country, but they go into these, wherever they go into these little groups, right? They form these little communities within communities. They're not trying to assimilate. Well, if you're coming to America to reap the benefits of America, why are you content to not assimilate?
Yeah.
And then, like I said, you know, they're sitting here, they've been run out of the country for fear of their life, and then they walk around waving the flag of their own country. Does that make sense?
No. No. And Larry, Laura had told me about this thing called an explanatory memorandum from the archives of the Muslim Brotherhood. And this was basically a plan for the overthrow of the United States through infiltration that was captured by the FBI in a raid of some member of the Muslim Brotherhood back in 2004. This was the Maryland, in August of 2004, an alert Maryland Transportation Authority police officer observed a woman wearing traditional Islamic garb videotaping the support structure of the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. And he conducted a traffic stop. And it looks like they seized this document. The version of it that I see here has a stamp on it as evidence in a government exhibit. But, you know, Laura's read this thoroughly and tells me that it's a 5-step plan and they're on step 4. So, you know, certainly a savvy organization could orchestrate a migratory invasion and, you know, even use the fake news and people like Ocasio-Cortez to rally support among the ignorant to let whoever into the United States for just the reasons that you've been describing.
Well, then you have another thing that I might as well tell everybody. Let's say that this movement does develop. How do you fight it? Do we want Cincinnati to look like Fallujah? I mean, yes, we've got sophisticated weapons. We do. We've got some of the most dynamic, systematic, technically elite weapons in the world that the world's ever known. Mm. But you can't turn them on American cities. You just can't. I worry about Dearborn, Michigan. What happens the day Dearborn declares that they are a Sharia caliphate? Mm. What are you going to do? Invade Dearborn? How are you going to do it? Mm. Look, how many states are passing laws, or at least are being brought up in the state legislatures acknowledging what? Sharia law.
Wow.
There should never be in America any legal court that recognizes anything other than United States constitutional law.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you know what? Coming up, states are passing, accepting Sharia law.
Who's talking about doing that, Larry?
Ohio.
Wow.
Ohio is one.
I've heard from a lot of our viewers who are in Minnesota that there's a huge Somali population in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Wikipedia says Somalis are an ethnic group in the Minneapolis, St. Paul, Twin Cities urban area, and it makes up one of the largest Somali diasporas in the United States. As of 2016, there were around 80,000 Somalis in Minnesota, and I do believe that the new congressional representative from that district is Somali, and she is among those who have caused Congress to change a 181-year-old rule that disallows you from wearing anything on your head. Now, I think this speaks to the whole integrating with the United States versus trying to convert the United States into the country that you left.
Mm-hmm. See, that all of these things, if the listeners will just be reasonable, I'm not asking anybody to panic, but I'm asking you to be conscious of what's going on around you. Because if that day comes, and all the signs are, if it wants to come, it can. That's what's scary. If it wants to happen, it certainly can. All of the facilities they need to accomplish it are here and here now. And Jason, there's never been in world history, there's never been a nation or a country that has succeeded with two societies in one.
Right.
I mean, either you're American or you're not. You can't be American and Salvadorian. You know, all of these people bringing their traditions and their history here, that's fine, I understand. But you can't break off, like Dearborn, you can't break off and be a Muslim country in America. You just can't do it.
Mm. But yet, Larry, they're allowing congressional representatives to be sworn in on the Koran, swearing to uphold the Koran. That should specifically be disallowed. You should have to swear on the Constitution to serve the Constitution. It's got to be the separation of church and state. I don't even think we should be using the Bible. It should be the Constitution that members of Congress swear on, irrespective of their religion.
Yeah, and you know, they say mixing all of these different cultures into our government is healthy. I don't see that. I see recognizing different cultures, of course, but you can't bring in 10 Muslims and then they form a caucus, and now you've got that group that everything they do, they work in the interest of Islam or Sharia, everything they do. Yeah. I mean, the system breaks down. You have to serve the Constitution if you are constitutionally elected to a constitutional office, that should be what you serve, not Islam. Certainly not Sharia.
Mm-hmm. Larry, I think we should maybe clarify for people, of course, that the things that you're saying to me are not in support of violence. You're just reminding people of their Second Amendment rights to bear arms, and we're not advising anyone to do anything violent. But this is the reason why we have the Second Amendment. And I don't own any guns, but people are certainly. I support the right for people to own guns, and exactly what Larry is talking about is why we need to protect the Second Amendment. And when you back up, Larry, and you look at all these gun incidents that have occurred, and any time they happen, immediately they're calling for bans on guns. We just did a big show about Las Vegas. The FBI closed the investigation into the October 1st shooting last week, and there was no ballistics done that connect the bullets to the people who were killed to these bump stocks. It's not even clear if the bump stocks were used. And it just, who was it? Eric Holder, who said he doesn't want to let a crisis go to waste. It seems like when something happens, they find a way to push some agenda with that. And I also want to be clear, Larry and I don't oppose immigration. We're not opposing that. It's the unfettered illegal immigration that casts laws aside and allows thousands and thousands of unknown people to enter the country in a disorganized, it's an invasion. They're bum rushing the borders. So I always appreciate getting your insights, Larry, and I do want to encourage our viewers who are listening to the show each week, which frankly is thousands of people, to go and visit nicholslive.com, click on the donate tab, and you're going to find Larry's email address. If you go to paypal.com, you can send money to Larry at he's nicholslive@aol.com. And of course, people can sponsor Crowdsource the Truth by going to patreon.com/crowdsource the truth and becoming a monthly sponsor, or making a one-time sponsorship at paypal.me/crowdsource the truth. And Larry, I really need people's sponsorships now. We're under attack. People are trying to diminish the value of Patreon. There's a lot of different people that are slamming Patreon for this issue that occurred. I'm seeing a lot of evidence that there's pressure being put on Patreon by these international payment processors. So I want to make sure that people are very careful who they get mad at in these situations. I'm sure everyone is still using their Visa cards and their MasterCards, but a lot of people are taking their anger out on Patreon, which really just hurts the people that are creating information that's going on there.
Well, Jason, I just want to say to everybody that, folks, in my case, the need for help is urgent. But at the same time, so too is Jason and Crowdsource. Folks, if you want this information, as you said, Jason, I didn't come on here trying to get people to panic, go waving guns, strapping them on their hips, and none of that.
Right.
I'm simply asking for people to be alert, pay attention. This bothers me. It should trouble more people. Now, every day for this week on my YouTube channel, I'll be talking about this and giving more details of the things that I know. But, Jason, I hope people support your program. I hope they support your effort. Because without you, none of this, folks, would even be subject to be talked about. Nobody's going to let me talk about this. Nobody.
Yeah. And that's precisely the reason, Larry, why so many people have come up with fake lawsuits, fake stories about me, throwing mud, making up nonsense, constantly insisting that things that didn't happen did, and they've got no evidence. It's just a smear campaign. Larry, I want to thank you for joining me. It's always so interesting to get your insights, and these conversations, I think, have become something that a lot of people really look forward to. We're out of time for today. Was there anything else you wanted to say before we wrap it up?
No, just, folks, be aware. Watch tonight, the State of the Union. It will be a show. The Democrats, I expect, to act up. But listen, listen to what Trump has to say. I think he's trying to protect the country. The Democrats are just trying to come up with anti-Trump. But folks, there's times for that, and there's times to be serious. We're at a time in this nation, Jason, where we better be serious. And the security to our southern border is incredibly serious.
Yeah. No, you're right, Larry.
And thank you. Come on, buddy. Thank you for this time every Tuesday.
Thank you, Larry. And we'll be back next Tuesday at 3 o'clock Eastern. Until then, I hope you're feeling well, Larry, and we'll see you next week. Don't forget, everyone, to tune in tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern. We've got another episode of More Pain with Michael Moore of True Pundit. That's available only on Patreon. So please subscribe to patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. Larry, thanks very much. Have a great day. I'll see everybody later tonight.
Thank you.